YouTube family, we're covering the Europa League final today. Make sure that you like and subscribe as we go ahead to the first of one of many interesting European League finals. Vamos! After overcoming Dortmund and Leipzig, Rangers face another Bundesliga opponent in their quest to secure the Europa League title. And while Eintracht Frankfurt's domestic form was nothing to write home about, the Eagles have soared on the continental stage, knocking out Barcelona, Betis, and West Ham, and will be looking to break Scottish hearts in Seville on Wednesday to end the season with hardware. Well, I'm joined by CBS Sports, our very own Jonathan Johnson, and first-time guest Stefan Bienkowski to break it all down. The Qué Golazo UEFA Europa League final preview begins right now. Hey, everybody, welcome to Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter, youtube.com/Qué Golazo, CBS Sports, and your CBS Sports app. It's the Europa League final, Frankfurt against Rangers. History in the making. Jonathan Johnson, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, doing very well, thanks. And yourself?
I'm very good. Very excited about this. It's a historic game, obviously, a Bundesliga and Scottish Premiership opponents facing each other, of course, in the Europa League final. And we have a great guest today, Transfer Mark's very own Stefan Bienkowski. How are you, buddy?
I'm very well, guys. Absolute pleasure to be on the show for the first time. So thanks for having me.
You know what, Stefan? I'm very excited because you're a Scot that covers German football. So you are perfect for today. Absolutely molded perfectly for this episode, right?
If you say so, I'll do my very best to live up to that grand opening. But yeah, I mean, it can only go downhill from there, but I'll do my best.
Absolutely. Don't worry about it. We don't hold JJ and I, we make the bar really low. So don't worry about it. You'll absolutely, you'll be fine. But Jonathan Johnson, Stefan Bienkowski, welcome everybody. Europa League final preview. It's an absolute cracker of a final, possibly not expected by almost anybody, to be honest with you, as Rangers look to make history because they've never won a European trophy. They've become runners-up in the past, but Frankfurt has way back, though. So this is a massive game. Jonathan Johnson, straight away, before we get into the matchups and all the tidbits that we're going to go into when it comes to this final, what do you think about this specific final? Did you expect these two to make it all the way to the final game?
No, absolutely not. And I don't think that many people probably would have put their money on both of the teams, perhaps one of them getting, to the final, certainly when we were looking at the way that the quarterfinal matchups were based. But I think Eintracht were probably, arguably slightly less favored than the Rangers based on the route that they would have had to take to the final, because many people were expecting that Barcelona, would go all the way, and otherwise that you'd have somebody like a West Ham or a Lyon. But it's Eintracht who have come out on top. And then obviously, to have Rangers in a Europa League final, majorly unexpected. I'm going to resist the urge to turn this into an Aston Villa podcast. But, once Gerrard left Rangers, I don't think, many people would have expected them to immediately go to a Europa League final. But here they are, and it's, it feels like a very traditional Europa League final. I think that's one of the things that I like about it. Like you were saying with Stefan earlier, he's perfectly, made to, for this podcast. It's the moment of reckoning for him, I guess. And I don't know what to expect from this final, but also at the same time, I'm really looking forward to it because it's so unexpected in terms of a matchup.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, to be perfectly honest with you. The thing that really stands out to me is that these are two clubs that have been kind of bubbling under the surface in European football for the last couple of years. Frankfurt, of course, did quite well a couple of seasons ago. And this season, they've kind of, again, gone from match day to match day as the underdogs. Barcelona, that tie was obviously the huge one, but they've done it in a number of games this season. I think they're also the only team that's still undefeated in the tie. And then, of course, there's Rangers as well, who, after Steven Gerrard took over, and along with Michael Beale, who the two of them built a very impressive team. And they kind of went from strength to strength in European football as well. It's easy to forget just how down on the dumps Rangers were when Gerrard took over. They were struggling domestically. They couldn't put together results in European football. Gerrard was the one who really gave them this incredible steel and determination to not go around dominating European ties, but they made themselves so incredibly hard to beat. And I don't want to take too much credit away from Gio Broncos because this entire season's been his project, but I think he's been quite fortunate to kind of inherit some outstanding, not only a team, but also just the infrastructure that Beale and Gerrard built, which I'm sure JJ will be chuffed to hear about as a Villa fan. But, they really did build something quite impressive there. And now that Rangers in the final, everyone will say, oh, well, fantastic. They've been so good this season. But in Scottish football, we've kind of been watching them slowly and surely kind of ride up the coefficients, to use that weird analogy. But yeah, so in a short, to kind of bring that back to home, I would say both these teams have been kind of riding under the radar, and they've now kind of got their moment in the spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's focus on Rangers first for a second, as both of you were talking. Obviously, it's no easy feat after obviously Gerrard leaving. And by the way, sorry, Stefan, I'm also a lifelong Villa fan. So if you get any more Villa tidbits throughout the episode, we apologize. We keep losing viewers every single week, but it's okay. We don't mind. But after Gerrard left, to your point, and Michael B as well, the Dutch manager, Gio Broncos had a lot to do, specifically because Celtic, with their own right, obviously they've won the Scottish Premiership, had to continue to fight. Let's just focus a little bit here, JJ, on Rangers and their journey. Obviously, we talked about how they've done the good job of already beating some Bundesliga pedigree, Borussia Dortmund earlier on, of course, RB Leipzig, of course. So when you think about this final itself, do you think straight away, just, right from the fact that the final is not going to be at Ibrox, because I really do believe that's the 12th man for them, how much is that going to impact them, the fact that they're traveling to Seville, JJ? How much pressure, I guess, are you adding on this Rangers side to try and get the job done away from home?
I don't know if I'd necessarily put any extra pressure on Rangers because it's the same for Eintracht. Both of these teams will travel in numbers, and make it an absolute festival of colour. It's pretty well documented what Scottish fans are like on their travels after we saw at the Euros last summer. But also, you look at the scenes that greeted some of Eintracht's games in the build-up, to this final, and I think the atmosphere is going to be absolutely electric. It is a funny quirk that Rangers' route to this final has included so many, of the big German teams. To come up against a Leipzig, dump them out. That was very unexpected. Even, as early as their clash against Dortmund, many people fancied Dortmund in that one. Yet, I like the point that Stefan made earlier when Van Bronckhorst came in. When a manager inherits a team that's been so well oiled and used to performing to such a level, it's very, very, I wouldn't say necessarily likely, but the possibility is extremely high that the team drops off a little bit. Van Bronckhorst, he came in a tough moment because he's having to, follow in the footsteps of Gerrard, but also at a moment where Celtic are starting to pick themselves up under Postecoglou. He has managed to maintain that level of performance, particularly in Europe. Yes, they've lost the Scottish title to Celtic this season, but I think many fans would have gladly traded that for the opportunity to win European silverware in a Europa League final this season. And I think that's, arguably one of the most impressive aspects of Rangers reaching this final. I think because of that, you're going to see, 90 minutes of absolute, passion, loyalty from the Rangers fans getting behind that team. And it's going to create a wonderful noise from both sets of fans.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The really fascinating thing about this final is that even though it's a Europa League final, it's going to have the same scale as a Champions League final. Rangers fans traveling abroad is well documented. They bring possibly hundreds of thousands to this game. Frankfurt in Germany, they're talking about how the club the club's supporters have chartered 9 flights, I think, so far to get the fans over there. Spain is always a popular destination for German tourists to begin with. So I've been making a joke all season that Frankfurt fans will need no, encouragement to get over there. So I do fear for the city of Sevilla, not because, Rangers fans or Frankfurt fans are ferocious or anything, but just the sheer scale of people that will be there. We're talking about Frankfurt showing up with 40,000, I think, for the Barcelona game. So it's going to be absolutely nuts. But in terms of to go back to the question, in terms of Rangers having that home advantage, it's a very similar thing to Frankfurt as well. Both teams have really relied on their home support for this game, and I think both teams will also be hoping for a lot of support in the stadium on the day. But as we've seen at times with UEFA competition, sometimes the fans get pushed aside for some corporate seats. But I've no doubt that both fans will be making a huge amount of noise, and it will. I mean, it quite literally is, but it will feel like a cup final with both ends of the stadium just blurting out noise and attention. So I don't think we have to worry about either team kind of shrinking into this kind of wallflower pose because I think they'll both be round to go.
Yeah, the energy is going to be fantastic. Let's focus a little bit of Eintracht Frankfurt here, Stefan. Obviously, Rangers, we know that they're one of two of the Goliaths of Scottish football, Celtic and Rangers, of course, and the pedigree that they continue to, not always dominate, but definitely one or two when it comes to domestic competition. Eintracht Frankfurt, for those that may not be as familiar with, they're not the Bayern Munichs of Germany. They're not even the Borussia Dortmunds or even Leverkusens. What have you expected, or I guess what can we expect from them? What is their overall general history? Because when I look at the table, 11th in the Bundesliga is not necessarily a fantastic record, but I look at their squad and there's so much talent. I believe they have a tremendous scouting platform that does a lot to focus on who can fit their system. Talk to us a little bit about Eintracht Frankfurt themselves as they head into this final.
Yeah, I mean, they're just one of many kind of sleeping giants in German football. Obviously, it's a nation of a huge amount of people, about 80 million people, it's the biggest country in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. And when you're in Germany, when you live in Germany, Frankfurt is one of the major hubs. It's a city full of people and full of culture. And obviously, it's also the financial hub of the country itself. So it's always been this weird thing in German football that Frankfurt should be a bigger club than they are. They obviously do have a huge amount of prestige, especially going back to the 80s and 90s in terms of specifically European football. But they have kind of tumbled around the leagues since then. And most recently, this has been an issue because, you have this board who are now in place and they are simply saying, look, this club should be bigger. We have one of the biggest fan supports in the league. We're in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. We really should be doing more here. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing this season. The really interesting thing, of course, is that everyone will be looking at this game thinking, why is the team in 11th place in the Bundesliga in the Europa League final? And the best way of describing that is simply the way of football they play. They have a new coach in Oliver Glasner who came in after a fantastic season last year at our Bundesliga club. And he's just very well known for playing this kind of counter-attacking, pragmatic football. And I think the best way that kind of works in the Europa League is very different from how it works in the Bundesliga. And I remember putting together a piece for this after the Barcelona tie. And the thing that really stood out to me was over the course of the two Barcelona games, I think Frankfurt averaged about 12 counterattacks per game. But in the Bundesliga match prior to the first tie against Greuther Fürth, they'd only been afforded 2 for the whole 90 minutes. So you have a Frankfurt team who they're hell-bent on counter-attacking, but the problem is in the Bundesliga, where they're still considered one of the biggest clubs, a lot of teams are quite happy to sit back. But in the Europa League, against Betis, against Barcelona, against West Ham, they're against these teams who historically or culturally would consider themselves to be bigger than Frankfurt. They're quite happy to throw everything they have at them, and Frankfurt are more than happy to sit back, pick them off. And that's why they've been so successful in the Europa League this season, whereas in the Bundesliga, they've been pretty meh, to be perfectly honest with you.
I mean, I think as well, from the Eintracht point of view, that style of football is, I guess, more familiar to a lot of Bundesliga teams. So it's easier to set yourself up against it than it is for teams in Europe who, come from different leagues and play different styles of football. Perhaps not the best news for Frankfurt that Rangers seem, particularly well suited to coming up against that style. But also, I mean, you look at the way that Wolfsburg have struggled since Glasner left. Obviously he has this aura, this ability to motivate his players, but organize them well as well. I mean, personally, I'm really happy that the Eintracht have made it this far, and I have like a funny memory from when I was at school. you know, when you do the exchange students, like a friend of mine did. My friend of mine did an exchange with a German student. So when he came to our Birmingham suburb, the guy's name was Marcel. You know, he sort of passed on this passion to my childhood friend for Eintracht, and they weren't particularly good at that moment. In fact, I think they were even in the Bundesliga 2. I've got a feeling they had Mehdi Mardavikia around about that time. Anyway, ever since then, ever since getting to know him, I've kind of kept an eye on Eintracht's like progress, mainly been in the Bundesliga, you know, the last few years, but, you know, to see them get themselves to this stage in Europe, and it's not just a one-off either, like Stefan was saying earlier, you know, they had a very good run a couple of years ago. And, you know, I think as well, you know, when you get to that stage in the season where domestic results are starting to drop off a little bit, European results are still going strong, and you see that opportunity, you know, to potentially break through the final few hurdles and get to a European final. I think it's only natural, you know, that there is, you know, a larger amount of focus placed on that potential European final as well.
Yeah, I love that story, by the way. Did Marcel go back to Germany with a Brummie accent? Did he come back to Germany and just like, you right there?
I'm not sure if he picked up that much in terms of useful vocabulary in Birmingham. He certainly didn't develop a passion for Villa, despite the fact that we had Hitzelsberger around that time.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous. The hammer is enough to get everybody excited. All right, well, we're going to take a break, everybody. When we come back, we'll do key matchups because there is a lot of individual talent on both sides, of course, and predictions from our Europa League final. Jonathan Johnson, Stefan Bienkowski, LME will be right back as part of our Qué Golazo Europa League final preview. Welcome back, everybody. Europa League final preview, Qué Golazo on Wednesday. Eintracht Frankfurt against Rangers. Fantastic stuff. All right, let's talk about the key matchups, boys. So much talent, as I mentioned. I'm a big fan of Santo Jorge. Stefan, of course, the South American Colombian, especially that goal that he scored, that banger. And then he dedicated it to Freddy Rincon. It was amazing as well. But I want Kamada, by the way, for Villa. Let's see what happens there. But let's talk about these individual matchups when you're looking at both sides, because from a Rangers perspective, specifically the lineup that they play, you know, they're not necessarily counter, but they are very, very fast on that break, as well as Eintracht are. Where are you expecting the individual matchups? What are you looking forward to, I guess, when these two face each other?
Yeah, I think you can't possibly look past the Kostic and the Tavernier lineup. Lineup, best expression. The show, the match down, whatever you want to call it. On the one side, you have James Tavernier, who's the right wing back for Rangers. He's the top goal scorer, believe it or not. Part of that's to do with the fact that he also takes the penalties. He takes the free kicks. He's very good at free kicks as well. But he's also just this absolute gung-ho right back. You know, we're talking like Roberto Carlos for Brazil kind of fullback here. And he's had a tremendous journey at Rangers. He came to not a huge amount of fanfare. He was known as a very average championship player, but he's come on leaps and bounds at Rangers. He's now the club captain. And yeah, he's just become their talisman, which just seems so bizarre at right back. But then on the other side, you have Filip Kostic, who is the left winger for Frankfurt. He is their playmaker. He even scores goals when he can. He does his best to try and tuck those corners into the back post whenever he can. He will be the danger man for Frankfurt. So, you know, if I'm looking at this Frankfurt team and I'm thinking how Glasner's going to try and break down Rangers, I think he's probably going to say, Kostic, you're going to have to get in behind Tavernier. I think Rangers will probably play a back three to try and deal with that, but it will still lead to a lot of space behind Tavernier. Tavernier, as good as he is going forward, he's always kind of had this criticism, often unfairly labelled at him from rival fans, that as good as he is going forward, he's not perhaps as good defensively. And I think that's where a lot of the Rangers fans will be hoping that he can keep Kostic quiet. Whether he can, I'm not entirely sure, because I think Kostic on his day is one of the best kind of wingers in the Bundesliga, especially due to the fact that he usually doesn't even have to beat his man. He's just so good at crossing the ball. So I think that's where most of the action will take place on the day. And whoever wins that kind of showdown will probably do a huge amount to help their team win the tie.
I think as well, when you're talking about Tavernier, it's very difficult to find any sort of fullback or wingback, you know, who actually is able to strike that balance between defense and attack that well these days. You know, most of them are either sort of attack-minded players, either on the left or right side, who are pushed back sort of out of necessity, or they're perhaps more central-based players who are pushed out there to give the team a bit more solidity. I feel like it's a dying art, the art of a wing-back who's able to balance both, or a fullback who's able to, offer a bit of solidity but still put a good cross in. I mean, for me, I think I'm curious to see how stable Eintracht can be defensively. They lost Hinteregger, which is a massive, massive blow for them. And I think there was an injury scare as well for Evan Ndicka, whose development with Frankfurt has really, really impressed me over the last couple of years, because he was quite unheralded when he was brought in from Auxerre, a bit similar in a way to the way that Sebastian Haller left Auxerre and then has exploded elsewhere since. It is a fantastic youth academy and develops some phenomenal talents, and these guys are just two of them lighting it up on the European stage at the moment. But I feel like that defensive solidity, despite the fact Rangers have some attacking headaches of their own in terms of the injuries, guys like Morelos and Roof, I do think that Frankfurt will need to be able to keep Rangers out, and how they set themselves up defensively. And I'm sure Stefan will have more insight into how they'll do that than me. I think that could be crucial in deciding the game.
Yeah, Aaron Ramsey, by the way, in and out of injury throughout the season. He didn't play in both legs in the Leipzig game. He hopefully will be available for this one, so that's another notion of help for Rangers. Here's a USMNT related question. Obviously, Qué Golazo, CBS Sports, US-based platform. James Sands, does he have any chance here? JJ, you think of playing the final? Why has he struggled so much for playing time?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously a lot was expected of him after moving to Scotland from NYCFC. I think there's always going to be an adaptation period, despite the fact that he's obviously moving from one English-speaking league to another. But culturally, like the styles of football are very, very different. Obviously, there'll be a big temptation for a lot of people to say, well, it's just a sign that, Major League Soccer is perhaps not at the same level as, even some of like the European leagues outside of the traditionally recognized top five. But I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's that it takes time to adapt to a new team. It doesn't help when there's a managerial change so soon after arriving as well. So for me, I think it's one of those moves that, you might see the best of him in the second season. But obviously, Stefan will have seen a lot more of him and Rangers on a weekly basis than me since his arrival.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd really add to that was a great answer to the question is that one of the few things that was kind of leveled at Steven Gerrard when he was at Rangers was that he just didn't do enough to bring through youth players. His teams were extremely reliant on experienced players that were signed to get the job done that season. He's obviously a very ambitious...
Sounds pretty familiar for Villa fans right now.
Well, yeah, there we go. What a surprise.
Stringing the echoes there, yeah.
It obviously did them remarkably well because they won the first league title in God knows how long. And as we kind of talked about at the start of the show there, how the progress had made in Europe. But it became quite clear that the kind of consequence of that was that Gerrard didn't really have the time. I wouldn't say he didn't have the inclination or he wasn't bothered. Of course he cared, but he just didn't have the time to blood young players through. And I think that's probably another consequence of what's happening at the club as well. Not only is Van Bronckhorst taken on a very impressive team that are already at the height of their powers, but he's also realised I can't shake the boat too much. I can't bring in young players because as soon as this team starts to break down, as soon as I start to change things too much and, the form starts to waver, there'll be question marks asked of me. So I would say Rangers are probably one of the toughest teams for a young player to actually break into at the minute. To kind of go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the kind of lineups and the key points of the pitch, Kamar Roof's a good example of this. He's came into this team at Rangers, proven player from down south. Whether he starts or not will be huge for Rangers. And the reason I bring that up is because in the previous time, the RB Leipzig match, he was injured. Rangers brought in Scott Wright. He's a young Scottish player they picked up from Aberdeen, and he hasn't had as much game time as well. So he looked very raw. He looked like he didn't really know what he was doing. It really took away an edge to that Rangers attack, even though they went on to win the tie. I think Kamar Roof would be a huge miss if he doesn't play for Rangers. But on the whole, it's a difficult team for young players to step into.
Yeah, good stuff there. Kamar Roof, by the way, friend of the show. He was on this show as well, talking about it way back as well. All right, well, it's prediction time, everybody. Yes, we've come to that point. Rangers, of course, as I mentioned, they do so well domestically, but this is historic for them, because from a European perspective, they won the European Cup, European Cup Winners' Cup in 1971-72, but they were runners-up in the UEFA Cup in 2007, 2008. That was to some Senate, I believe. They lost that one. So, they've never won this competition. It's a big one for them. And JJ brought up a really good point a few weeks ago about how this is monumental, really, for Scottish football as well, on how good both Celtic and Rangers are looking in the European, picture, I guess. All right, so let's talk about this, because Eintracht Frankfurt have done this before, but it was a while ago. Prediction time. Stefan, I'm going to go to you first. What do you expect in Sevilla, my friend?
Okay, so I know I'm supposed to be here waving the Bundesliga flag and saying Frankfurt will romp to this fantastic victory, but I actually have some major concerns, and I'll explain why. To date, Frankfurt have managed to overcome these teams, as I said earlier in the show, because these teams have showed up, said, we're the favourites, we're going to dominate this match, we're going to beat you, Frankfurt. And Frankfurt have been happy to sit back, counter-attack, and pick them off. Rangers are the first team they've really had to play in Europe this season who are probably even more of an underdogs than them, at least in the modern equivalent of the game. I guess Rangers maybe have a bigger history, but especially amongst US audience. But I think going into this game, Rangers are underdogs, and they're also a defensive counter-attacking team. So I think the onus will be on Frankfurt to be the attacking side. That won't suit them. And I think, as we've seen in previous rounds against Dortmund, Leipzig, I actually think Rangers will pick them off. And at this moment in time, I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say they're favourites, but I think they'll end up winning the match. A very tight match, a very low-scoring match as well, I think, perhaps. But I think Rangers will be the ones who lift the cup in the end. In 90
minutes, Stefan, or do you think it'll go to extra time?
Oh, good question. Yeah, let's say extra time. Let's have some fun. Let's say extra time.
All righty. All right. Rangers, a tight victory in extra time. Jonathan Johnson, what do you think?
That's really interesting, because I also have it pegged going to extra time, but I think that it will ultimately be Eintracht who come out on top. I'm tempted by a 2-1. And it's interesting to hear the way that Stefan thinks the game will unfold, because it wouldn't surprise me if it was Rangers, who get on the front foot at some point in the match. Eintracht managed to haul themselves back into it, and then it's that momentum that carries them on. I mean, I kind of get the feeling that it's one of those weird games where for either team, it would be kind of a nightmare scenario to take an early lead, because then it suddenly puts them in the driving seat for the remainder of the game. And it sounds like both of them are teams that will fare better, in terms of, reacting to one another, certainly based on what we've seen recently. So, yeah, for me, I think I'm going to go for a 2-1 Eintracht win, but after extra time.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I got to be the breaker then. One has Eintracht Frankfurt, the other one has Rangers. Come on, I got to go with... All right, okay, you're going to penalties for that one. You're going to penalties.
No, I'm saying you have to go to penalties just to separate it.
I will go to penalties, and I'm going to penalties. I'm going to give this to Rangers. The romantic in me wants to give it to Rangers, but we'll see what happens. But fantastic stuff, the Europa League preview, which final, which, by the way, you can watch on Wednesday on Paramount Plus and CBS Sports. And, of course, we'll have a recap right after the game as well. Well, for the sake of a professional perspective, I really hope it doesn't go to penalties. I want to finish early on that day, but we will see. But Stefan Bienkowski, it's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh, guys, I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much. Enjoy the game.
Absolutely. Make sure to follow Stefan on Twitter. And Stefan, I'm just looking over at your handle, because obviously... let me see here. Yeah, S. Bienkowski right there, of course. Make sure to follow him on Twitter, and all the content for Transfer Market as well, covering the Bundesliga for Telegraph and many more outlets as well. Jonathan Johnson, John_Le Gossip. Always a pleasure, JJ. We only talked about Villa a little bit. It was pretty good.
Yeah, likewise. Always a pleasure being with you, LME, and great to link up with Stefan after what's been quite a while. You know what? I really could have gone into much more detail about Villa, but why bother? They kind of put me in a bit of a bad mood over the weekend. We'll see if that changes on Thursday. Obviously, we're into the final week of the Premier League, so we've got 2 games to look forward to. Not particularly optimistic about either, but we'll save that for another episode later this week. We will, and I'm sure once again, when me and you just get on it, we'll keep talking. But I'm looking forward to the summer. That's what I'm expecting to do, and we got continued for 20 million, so I'm not even complaining. All right, the Europa League final preview has been fantastic. That Stefan Bienkowski, Jonathan Johnson, LME. Like I said, make sure to watch the final on CBS Sports and Paramount Plus. Have a fantastic
rest of your week. Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter, youtube.com/Qué Golazo, CBS Sports, and your CBS Sports app. We will see you next time. Enjoy this final and the many more to come. Till then.